Hey guys, tonight we're drifting into a world where no alarms buzz, no phones vibrate, and not a single screen glows in the dark. Instead, you're waking up on a straw mattress in a cool, quiet 19th century bedroom. There's a faint scent of coal smoke in the air, maybe bread baking downstairs. You blink into the early gray light and realize there's no alarm, no bedside clock. And yet you've got to rise, dress, and start the day. So how did you do it? You're not just waking yourself. Maybe you're responsible for waking up your younger siblings. Or you've got butter to churn before the sun crests. The hill. Perhaps you're a seamstress expected at your bench by 6, or a laundress who needs the copper heated and the tubs filled before the mistress rings the bell. Time isn't printed on your wrist. It's woven into your routines, your neighbors' footsteps, the creak of morning carts, and sometimes sheer guesswork. This was the 19th century. Clocks existed, sure, but not everyone had them. And among those who did, most didn't trust them much. They were prone to stopping, running fast, or worst of all, being set by someone else's idea of right. Instead, women devised 100 sleepy workarounds to wake up on time. You're about to experience them all. Some are ingenious, some are ridiculous, and a few might leave you wondering how anyone ever managed to be punctual at all. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere interesting, I'd love to know, drop your location and what time it is where you are right now in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your eyes close again, this time in imagination, as you step back to a time when waking was an art. It's late summer, maybe 1840, maybe 1870. You're lying on your back in a modest cottage, somewhere outside York. The rooster is asleep. The sun hasn't crept through the curtains yet, but your internal clock nudges you. That's right, there's laundry due at the manor by 9. You swing your legs over the side of the bed, and there it is again. That quiet panic. What time is it really? In this first section of our story, you'll live in this uncertainty for a bit longer. Because before the knocker-ups, before the pebbles and contraptions, there was simply your own body. And maybe, if you were lucky, a neighbor who was just slightly more of a morning person than you. Many 19th century women, especially in rural communities, had to develop an intuitive relationship with time. It started young. A girl would learn to notice when the light changed through the slats of a wooden shutter. She might track the bird song the robin's first chirps came just before the milking hour. Even the sounds from other homes offered clues. If you heard the Blackwell's daughter lighting the fire, you were already late. In towns, things grew more complex. The rhythms were dictated less by natural cues and more by schedules imposed from above. Church bells ringing the hour, factory whistles screeching at shift changes, even a horse-drawn milk cart that made its rounds with uncanny regularity. But even then, a woman had to guess when to wake, because unless she could afford a timepiece, and many couldn't, it was on her to know. Some women slept lightly on purpose, keeping their bodies attuned to small sounds. The floorboard creak of the milkman outside, the distant train, the groan of wind in the old barn that always hit at a certain hour. You start to learn these things. You start to feel them in your bones. But here's where it gets sleepily absurd, because not all bodies cooperate. Imagine your frustration when your neighbor, old Mrs. Penelope, the one who lives alone with 3 cats and no real obligations, wakes you up at 4 a.m. by clanking around outside, and now you're fully awake, cursing the thin walls and your overly responsible brain. That's when women started to get clever. You hear stories passed down in whispers. One woman sets a small dish of peas on a tilted plate at the edge of her knitstand. When the cat jumps up in the morning for its usual snuggle, the dish wobbles and sends peas flying, waking her with a clatter. Another hangs a wet cloth from a slowly dripping tin, so that come dawn, the cloth hits her face with a cold slap. Ingenious? Sure. A bit wet? Definitely. Historians still argue whether these kinds of bodily clock tricks worked long term, or if they were more psychological placebo than practical tool. Maybe they worked just once long enough to impress someone, or make a wedding appointment. Or maybe women really did train themselves, Pavlov style, with tea, light, and rhythmic habits. But if you're picturing every 19th century woman leaping out of bed at exactly the right moment with fresh breath and dewy eyes, slow down. More likely, you'd oversleep at least twice a week. Your employer might scold you. A child might spill the milk because you were still lacing your boots at 8:02 instead of 7:45. You get the idea. Still, some women got very good at it. There are accounts of midwives who woke like clockwork before laboring mothers needed them, or shepherdesses who knew the first glimmer of moonset meant it was time to head back toward the cottage. Was it science? Or was it just thousands of repetitions over years until the body simply knew? One letter from a woman in 1856 mentions her habit of waking when the fire burned low and the air changed temperature around my toes. That's how precise some of these human alarm systems became. You weren't just tracking light or sound, but the feel of the room. A goose flesh on your arm, a whisper of morning cold. And let's be honest, there's a kind of freedom in this. Chaos. You aren't ruled by a ticking device or a digital tone. You're allowed to mess up. You're allowed to trust your own rhythms. There's something quietly lovely about waking when your nose says the porridge is nearly done, not because a phone screen flashes 7 o'clock. So tonight, as you fall asleep, imagine you're there. No alarms, no deadlines. Just the hope that, when your eyes flutter open, the rest of the world is just about to stir too. Or already has . And if not, well, you'll find a better trick tomorrow. So, let's say your natural instincts have let you down again. You've overslept, and now you're frantically pulling on your dress, jabbing pins into your hair as you stumble down the creaky steps. You're late. And if this happens once, too often, it might cost you more than a scolding. That's why many working-class women in 19th century cities turned to a very peculiar solution, hiring a human alarm clock. They were called knocker-ups. Yes, that's a real job title. And no, it's not what it sounds like. These weren't mysterious intruders or uninvited matchmakers. They were people, men, women, even children, who made a modest living by waking others up at precise times each morning. Picture this. You're living in Manchester in 1882. Your rented room is above a fishmonger's, and your landlady is suspicious of your ever-slipping punctuality. So, you pool a few coins and hire old Miss Agnes, a known knocker-upper, on your block. She arrives at precisely 5 a.m. each morning, peering up at your window with one eye squinting through steam rising from the bakery across the street. She then uses a long pole sometimes with a bit of rubber or leather at the end and gives your upstairs window a few deliberate taps. Tap, tap. You wake with a start, heart thudding. That's Agnes. She's already on to her next client. Some knocker-ups used pea shooters, yes, actual hollow reeds firing dried peas at windows to wake clients. No joke. In East London, the pea shooter was a signature style. It wasn't unusual to see an elderly woman with a bag of dried legumes and perfect aim, knocking a dozen people awake before sunrise. Others tapped with sticks. One man reportedly customized his tapping rod with a hinge, allowing it to wrap slightly around second-story windows for a louder thunk. One rather ambitious knocker-up in Lancashire was known to carry a small ladder to tap higher windows, which also occasionally got him mistaken for a burglar. Occupational hazard. You might think, surely people just used alarm clocks? Well, not quite yet. Mechanical alarm clocks did exist by the mid-19th century, but they were far from reliable, expensive, and mostly owned by the well-to-do. Even when they were available, most of them had one fatal flaw. They couldn't be trusted to ring accurately, or loudly enough. Besides, knocker-ups were socially flexible. They remembered your shift changes. If you worked nights at the textile mill and needed to sleep in on Thursdays, they knew. If you needed waking for a funeral one morning, they adjusted their route. A clock couldn't do that. And knocker-ups were early entrepreneurs. Some had dozens of clients. One woman in Birmingham claimed to wake over 80 people per day, walking a circuit that took her 2 full hours to complete. She started around 3:30 a.m., all weather, all seasons, armed only with a stick, a shawl, and a stubborn sense of punctuality. There's a mild comedy in this, of course. Imagine being a 19th century woman who's paying someone to knock her awake, only to have to knock someone else awake 10 minutes later. A whole daisy chain of humans gently harassing each other out of dreams. You almost want to ask, who knocks up the knocker-up? And yes, that question became common enough that it was the subject of poems, pub jokes, and even a cartoon or two in Victorian newspapers. Some knocker-ups were couples. One stayed up late, the other rose early. Some simply never slept full nights. The most famous, Mary Smith of East London, was reputed to sleep in short bursts between rounds, napping in stairwells or beside boilers. Historians still argue whether the rise of knocker-ups reflected ingenuity or urban desperation. Was this a proud adaptation to factory life, or a sad symptom of a world where rest became a commodity? One thing is certain. For women in crowded, poorly lit homes with multiple jobs and unpredictable hours, having someone else manage the first 10 minutes of the day could mean the difference between work and starvation. But it wasn't all work and worry. There was community in this system. You might nod to your neighbor's knocker-up as she passed, wrapped in scarves, nodding solemnly as if to say, asterisk, I got your girl awake today. Don't worry. Asterisk, some even developed rivalries. In certain towns, there were competing knocker-ups, undercutting each other's prices by a halfpenny or boasting better accuracy. You could imagine them whispering to potential clients, Mrs. Dent's rod is too soft. Mine'll wake you from a coffin. Children got involved too. In working-class families, a bright young girl might take on a few clients herself, knocking at windows before school to earn extra bread money. By 13, she might already know which chimney's smoke meant her next client was stirring, or which door creaked even if you whispered near it. And if you were wealthy, well, you didn't hire a knocker-up. Your maid woke you, having herself been woken by either the senior servant or, yes, you guessed it, her knocker-up. The hierarchy of sleep was as real as the class system it lived inside, but the system worked. Entire cities, like London and Manchester, quietly depended on this network of silent tappers and careful risers. And many of them were women. Elderly widows, young girls, single mothers, people who understood better than most that waking up wasn't just personal. It was economic survival. And somehow, against all odds, the taps came at the right moment. More often than not. Now, as you imagine yourself lying under a faded quilt, eyelids heavy, a soft knocking sound brings you out of slumber. You blink. There's the stick against your window, gentle but persistent. You rise, dress quickly, and smile out the glass at a bundled figure already halfway down the road. You didn't need a nap. You just needed Agnes. Let's say you're not lucky enough to live in a city. No knocker-ups here. You're somewhere more remote, maybe a hamlet in Derbyshire, maybe a farmhouse on the outskirts of Nova Scotia. No church bells, no steam whistles, No neighbor knocking. Your shutters with a stick. Just the sighing of wind in the chimney and the odd bark of a dog dot. So how do you wake up? Well, you get creative. Because when timepieces are scarce and morning duties still await, necessity becomes the mother of absurdly clever invention. Tonight, we explore the wild, quiet ingenuity of women who built homegrown alarm devices. Out of thread, teacups, pins, water, string, coins, and in one rather daring case, the family goat. You're lying in bed, as you always are at this point in our journey. Its dark clouds are hiding the moon, and you can hear your father snoring through the wall. But beside your bed, on the rickety knitstand, is your proudest invention yet? A teacup, half filled with water, balanced precariously on the edge. Of a plate, which in turn is resting on a thin line of yarn connected to the door latch. Here's how it works. Your mother opens your door at her usual time, 5:30, sharp without speaking. The latch catches the yarn. The yarn yanks the plate. The plate tips the cup. The water splashes down and hits your forehead. In a perfect arc, you jolt awake, gasping. It's crude. It's chilly. It's brilliant. And it wasn't rare. These sorts of tricks were widespread. Oral histories across England and the rural U's are filled with tales of falling spoons, coin drops, and candle time bombs. Let's talk about that. Last one, you take a long taper candle. You measure how fast it burns, roughly an inch per hour. You mark a line near the base. Then you melt a small pin or nail into the wax at that point. Light the candle before bed. It burns and burns. Then it reaches the pin. Clink. The pin drops into a metal cup below. The resulting noise is just enough to wake you. Unless you're deep asleep, in which case you simply get to enjoy a minor fire hazard in your sleep space. Charming, isn't it? Some women got even more inventive. A diary entry from a Massachusetts girl in 1872 details how she strung her curtain cords around a tin lid, then tied them to a spring door that released a goose from the pantry at dawn. The goose, confused and honking, became a most effective and chaotic alarm. It lasted precisely 3 mornings before her mother forbade poultry in bedrooms, in working households. Little rituals emerged. You might place a string on your finger and run it under the pillow to a tiny pebble on the knitstand. In theory, the tension of the string would alert you as it shifted. In practice, you'd probably get tangled in your sleep and wake up with a rock in your armpit. Still, better than oversleeping for market day. Historians still debate whether these devices were commonplace or isolated flashes of domestic brilliance. Some argue they were too fiddly to be practical. Others suggest they were used precisely because women had to innovate with what they had. We do know that homemaking guides and ladies' household journals in the late 19th century occasionally included instructions for automatic morning stirrers, some even describing weight and pulley systems using kitchen items to tilt a cradle, ring a bell, or swing a brush down onto the bed. One such guide from 1883 boasts a blueprint for the water sash method, where a tin of water hung on a window latch is set to tip when sunlight hits a small mirror that heats a wax stopper. Think of it as steampunk Rube Goldberg. Powered by sun, sabotage, and hope dot, then there's the use of pennies. Place a coin upright on a thin stick of wax. As the wax melts overnight, the penny eventually drops into a cup or tin bowl. Asterisk ping. Time. To wake up and feed the chickens. Unless the cat knocked it over first. This, too, becomes a common theme. For every clever device, there is a furry household member ready to ruin it. Cats jumped on tables. Dogs ate the string. Goats chewed the pulley rope. Children mistook the setup for a toy and dismantled it gleefully. And yet there's something very human in all of this. These weren't factory-made solutions. They were intimate, personal, messy. Waking up was a puzzle women solved over and over again, each time a little differently. And even when they didn't work perfectly, these small machines, cups, string, pins offered agency in a world where time was often dictated by others. Imagine lying in your bed, listening for the sound of the penny to drop. The room is quiet. The air is still. Your ears strain toward the tin bowl. You almost wish it wouldn't fall yet, just a little longer beneath the quilt. But then clink, and off you go. One woman in Cornwall recalled using the same system every winter from ages 14 to 23, only retiring it when she married a man who snored so violently he woke me up hourly anyhow. Love has its uses, apparently. Even today, some traditional communities preserve versions of these rituals. An anthropologist working in rural Anatolia recorded grandmothers who still tie knots in their shawls. Before sleep to mark the hour, they must wake, believing that the brain remembers the knot through the night. So tonight, as your own room quiets down and your phone's alarm waits silently beside you, consider this. You once had to build your own wake-up call out of wax and feathers and hope and the weird certainty that when the pin fell, you'd rise. And you did. Let's say, despite your best efforts, thread alarms, dropped coins, even the teacup system, you finally give up and turn to the oldest, most instinctive wake-up method, trusting the rooster. And why not? Roosters are famously early risers. Loud, persistent, not particularly subtle. Perfect, right? Well, not exactly. You're living in a cottage just outside Bath, sometime around 1860. A light breeze curls under the door. Somewhere in the corner, a kettle cools from the night before. And from the coop just outside the kitchen garden, your feathered roommate gives a single, confused squawk. It's 2:41 a.m. He crows again. You groan. This, dear listener, is the dilemma of depending on poultry to manage your schedule. Roosters, for all their mythological bravado, are notoriously unpredictable. Some crow at the crack of dawn. Others at the crack of whenever they feel like it. A full moon? They'll crow? A sudden noise? Crow. The neighbor's lantern flickers through the barn slats? Time to scream. Some crow like they're auditioning for the opera. Others, barely a raspy whisper. You poor hopeful soul have tried, using your rooster as a feathered timepiece. You even named him Reginald, hoping a name with gravitas might imbue him with a sense of responsibility. It did not. Tonight, Reggie crowed at 2:41. Yesterday, 5:17. The day before, silence. You thought he might be dead. He wasn't. He was just moody. Many 19th century women reported the same frustrations. Roosters were deeply unreliable. They were sensitive to weather, easily disturbed, and often just temperamental. Some even crowed all night during thunderstorms or full moons, throwing entire neighborhoods into a confused, half-awake fog. Historians still debate whether roosters actually have a circadian rhythm aligned with dawn, or if their internal clocks are shaped more by habit, light cues, and random interruptions. Some modern studies suggest they respond to subtle shifts in temperature or barometric pressure, which, in an 1840s cottage with no insulation, meant you might be awakened by your rooster every time the wind changed. But back then, you didn't have studies. You had Reggie. And if Reggie screamed, you got up. There are letters, many of them, delightfully irritated, written by women, describing their frustrations with their crowing alarm clocks. One Welsh diary from 1874 states flatly, Clara's rooster announced, dawn at 3:10, and again at 3:27, and once more at 4:55. My nerves are shattered. Another reads, he crowed 4 times in the dark, then slept through sunrise. I've considered stew. Yet despite their flaws, roosters were the poor woman's timekeeper of choice. They were free, they were loud, and if you fed them well, they at least gave you eggs by proxy. Some families raised specific breeds, known for good crowing, like the Dorking or Leghorn, though these were often just as inconsistent as their lesser cousins. Still, many women began developing strategies to guide their rooster's timing. You, for example, might try keeping the coop covered in the evening, then cracking it just before your own bedtime, so Reginald would see false dawn later. Feeding your rooster on a strict schedule to encourage consistent waking habits. Positioning your bed near a window that faces the coop, hoping to catch the first call more clearly, unless, of course, it snowed and he stayed silent. Or, if you're a little less patient, you might even sleep with the window open, braving the cold just to hear the familiar cock-a-doodle-doo at the right hour. One clever woman in Sussex, according to a local tale, trained her rooster to crow, on command by mimicking the sound at bedtime and feeding him a small treat. The rooster, believing it was time to answer back, eventually began crowing on cue at dusk, and then later at sunrise too. Whether this tale is fact or farmer's myth, we'll never know. But it speaks to the lengths people went to for even a shred of consistency. Of course, some women abandoned the bird entirely. You might remember our friend Agnes, the knocker-up, from earlier. She famously told a newspaper reporter in 1891 that she trusted pigs more than roosters for punctuality. Apparently, pigs became restless just before dawn when they knew breakfast was coming. So if you had a pigsty nearby, you might listen for the rustling and snorts as your real wake-up call. And yet, despite all the noise and nonsense, roosters became symbols of early rising. They featured in children's rhymes, needlepoint samplers, and advertisements for healthy domestic routines. Victorian breakfast pamphlets often featured a proud rooster in the corner, next to slogans like, "Awake with the cock's crow," or "Let dawn's herald guide your industry," as if Reggie wasn't still asleep under a bucket. But in reality, you'd usually wake up before he did just in case. There's something gently funny, isn't there, about trusting an animal with no interest in your social obligations to manage your day? You'd lie in bed, half dreaming, waiting only to discover you'd overslept because Reggie had a sore throat. Again, still, when he did crow right on time, it felt like magic. That clear, triumphant sound slicing through morning. Fog? It stirred something deep, ancient even like a connection to your ancestors, who rose by bird call and candlelight dot. So you forgive him. You always do. Tonight, you pull the quilt closer around your shoulders and picture that noisy, neurotic bird sitting on his perch, feathers puffed, head tilted, maybe dreaming of seeds. You smile, Dot, and in your dream, he crows perfectly, on cue, just as the sun kisses the horizon. You're lying still beneath the covers, again same bed, same thin mattress, same soft clank of the stove cooling for the night. But this time, you're trying something different. No strings, no teacups, no unpredictable rooster crowing at ghosts. You're using sunlight, not in the modern, gentle wake-up lamp kind of way. No, this is Victorian-era passive solar strategy done with swags of fabric, homemade linen shears, and sheer morning desperation. It starts with positioning. Your bed is placed just so head facing east, ideally so that the first rays of the sun stream through the single pane glass directly onto your eyelids. The curtain is thin, maybe even non-existent. Perhaps you've rigged a section of it to open just enough, thanks to a bit of tied twine or a partially jammed hinge. And then you wait for morning. This was a surprisingly common method for working class women in the 19th century, especially those who couldn't afford help or lived in homes with awkward light. You, in this moment, are relying on the Earth's rotation and your understanding of local sunrises to get to work on time. No pressure. But as you quickly learn, the sun isn't always cooperative. Let's say it's late November. Dawn takes her sweet time. Or worse, thick fog hangs over the village, muting everything into dull gray. You oversleep by a full hour, and the entire morning is thrown into a slow-motion panic. The porridge burns. Your youngest won't find her second boot. Someone swore they saw you, running toward the bakery with your hair half pinned and your sleeves inside out. And still sunlight remains your go-to. Why? Because when it works, it's gentle, warm, soothing. You don't wake with a jolt, but with a gradual awareness of light filtering through a ripple of curtain. It touches your cheek, makes your eyelids glow amber. You blink, stretch, and feel, almost like you were meant to wait this way. Many 19th century homes took this strategy further. Some were designed with intentional waking windows, small east-facing panes near beds, sometimes positioned low enough that sunrise would hit your face even while lying down. More often than not, though, the architecture didn't cooperate, so women adapted. You, for example, might cut a slit in your curtain, just wide enough for the light to beam through and hit a mirror angled perfectly to reflect the dawn into your eyes. There's trial and error, and sometimes a burnt lace curtain. Some women removed their curtains altogether, though this meant forfeiting privacy and inviting the curious gaze of morning passers-by. Others used shutters with carved patterns to let in just enough light and small decorative bursts. A clever, unintended benefit. The brighter the room, the more elaborate the excuse if you were still in bed. And let's not forget the communal cues. In close-knit neighborhoods, sunlight wasn't just something you tracked. It became a shared rhythm. When your neighbor's cat stretched on the windowsill at first light, you knew you were 5 minutes from needing to be up too. The squeak of a hand cart wheel, the squeal of a shop shutter being lifted. These were your secondary alarms, triggered by sun-kissed routine. Historians still argue whether this method was truly effective, or simply what people settled for. One 1848 article from a London Housewives column dryly states, "If the sun will not rise with purpose, the day begins in disappointment." A fair critique from someone likely peeling potatoes at 6 a.m. Then. Of course, there's weather. Picture this. It's raining. Thick clouds smother the village. You wake in pitch-dark silence. For a delicious fleeting moment, you think it's still the middle of the night. You turn, pull the quilt tighter. Drift slam, the neighbor's gate. You sit bolt upright. You've overslept. Again, that's the peril of relying on light. It doesn't knock. And yet, it wasn't just the sun. Clever women used combinations of light and material to train themselves to wake. For instance, sleeping with your face toward a window. In summer, but away from it in winter, so that in warmer months, the sunrise nudged you up earlier. Or switching to thinner curtains in planting season. You might even use sheets of oiled paper to diffuse the light early, homemade mood lighting. For waking, some household journals suggested leaving a mirror near your bed to catch the morning rays and reflect them into your face. But with that came a different issue. You'd wake up startled by your own reflection, blurry and backlit, like a Victorian ghost. Effective? Yes. Pleasant? Not always. In the countryside, this whole method could backfire beautifully. One farmer's wife described sleeping through sunrise entirely, thanks to heavy dew mist that kept her room in gloom well past 7. Another account tells of a girl who, thinking it's still dark, missed a wedding she was meant to dress for only to discover she'd left her apron hanging over the one good sunlit window. Still, even with its unpredictability, sunlight became a favorite method. It was natural, free, didn't require winding, resetting, or shouting. You didn't need to buy it. You just had to respect it. And sometimes manipulate it. There's something poetic about that, isn't there? Letting the sun wake you, season by season, shifting just slightly each month as the days stretched or shrank. Your body began to learn, to expect, maybe even to trust so tonight as you lie in bed and the dark presses soft against the windows. Imagine a world without timers or digital chimes. Just the rising sun, slow, golden, stubborn filtering through linen, brushing your skin, and gently pulling you into the day. Unless, of course, it's cloudy. It's early, very early. But you're not waking up on your own this time. You're being woken not by footsteps, by the soft creak of floorboards in the next room, by the muffled clatter of someone fumbling with the iron kettle in the darkened kitchen. This isn't about clocks anymore. This is about people. Tonight, you're living in a house where waking is a shared responsibility, where the day begins as a ripple one woman rises first, stokes the fire, starts the tea, and slowly the others follow. Welcome to the domestic relay of the 19th century. You're the third of 5 daughters in a weaver's cottage in Leeds, sharing a bed with your younger sister, Agnes, who kicks in her sleep and steals all the covers. You know she won't wake up on her own, and you're the one in the family who always wakes second. The first is Mother. She rises when it's still inky outside. She's trained herself to wake to the faintest draught, the hush of the wind, changing direction. You've asked her how she does it. She just shrugs. When it's time, I know. She never uses a clock. Not that the house doesn't have one, it does. But it's unreliable and kept mostly for show. A gift from an uncle who wound it backward for a decade before anyone noticed. Mother's mornings are precise. She lights the fire. She sets water to boil. She lays out the first clean apron, and then, as the house begins to warm, she comes for you, not with yelling, not with a bell, but with the gentle shaking of a shoulder, the whisper of your name, the lightest tug on your braid. And now it's your job to wake Agnes, not this. Too is part of the rhythm of female life in many 19th century homes. You are the next link in the waking chain. You nudge Agnes until she groans. You give her the quilt tug. Maybe flick a bit of cold water at her neck if she's extra stubborn in larger homes, especially those with servants or extended families. The waking. Order was an unspoken hierarchy. The cook might rise first woken by her own instinct, or by the scullery maid who was woken by the stable boy, who was woken by the rattling of the first milk cart passing in the lane in boarding schools and convents. The chain became institutionalized. Bell systems, sometimes powered by ropes that snaked through ceilings and walls, allowed one early riser to rouse a dozen others. In the absence of a bell, it was up to the early girl, a rotating duty often hated and feared, to rise before everyone else and begin the process. You can picture her, groping in the dark for stockings, tiptoeing across cold floors, quietly waking the next girl in line, always starting with the most responsible sleeper and ending with the one who needed 10 pokes and a prayer dot. It wasn't just efficiency, it was strategy. One wrong link in the chain, and the entire morning could collapse. Historians still argue whether this system empowered girls and women with self-discipline, or simply burdened them with domestic timekeeping roles they didn't choose. But one thing's clear. In a world where time had to be felt, not told, waking each other was a skill and sometimes a battleground. You remember the time Agnes got back at you by waking you an hour early by mistake. She claimed she didn't. Realized the light was from the lantern someone left on. You suspected vengeance for stealing her shawl last Thursday. Even grown women played the waking game. In some households, waking first was a point of pride. The woman who lit the first fire, baked the first loaf, and laid out breakfast before the others stirred was seen as industrious, virtuous, and sometimes downright insufferable. There are letters usually laced with sarcasm. describing this quiet competition. One reads, Cousin Margaret had already hung out 2 linens and finished her needlework by the time I'd even sat up. I suspect witchcraft or insomnia. Still, most women work together, bound by shared tasks and survival. If you didn't wake your sister, she might miss her shift at the textile mill. If your aunt didn't wake in time to prepare the mid-morning meal, the field hands might go without Dot. So, even in sleep, you held responsibility. And even when you were exhausted, you got up Dot in some cultures. This collective rhythm was even stronger. In many West African and Caribbean households, multiple generations shared living quarters, and waking up together, singing, calling, stretching, was a ritual in itself. In South Asian joint families, waking began with the rustle of a grandmother's sari, the hiss of boiling milk, the hum of morning prayers. These sounds replaced clocks. They were clocks, Dot, and in the quiet, rural spaces of Europe, the same thing played out more subtly. A spoon clinking against a pot, the familiar footsteps of the sister brushing her hair, the thud of a water bucket placed just outside your bedroom door. These were all wake-up calls, even if no one said a word. Tonight, as you lie in bed under your own covers, consider how many mornings were shaped, not by bells or devices, but by people, by women nudging women, by daughters waking mothers, by friends shaking shoulders in the early dark. Dot. It's not just nostalgic. It's communal, beautiful, even Dot, and yes, sometimes hilariously flawed. Remember the cousin who fell back asleep after being woken and then claimed to have risen in her dream? Classic. But still, the chain held. Most days, it worked. Dot. Tomorrow morning, it's your turn to be first. Your mother's got a headache, and you volunteered to light the fire. The house is yours to wake. Dot. Sleep well. You've got people counting on you. There's a quiet magic in the morning air, the kind you can't measure by clocks or knocks or rooster calls. It's the sound of rituals unfolding, of tea kettles humming, shoes scraping on worn wooden floors, and lamps being snuffed. Tonight, you find yourself in the kitchen of a modest 19th century home, somewhere in rural Ireland. You're the woman who's always been tasked with the early morning brew. It's your duty and your pride. The kettle will sing. The teapot will wait. And you, well, you'll be wide awake before the sun claims the sky. Tea, in the 19th century, wasn't just a drink. It was a carefully orchestrated wake-up act. You reach for your tin of loose leaves, the aroma rich and earthy, even in the dim. Candlelight. You boil water on the stove, and as the steam curls upward, you hear the house begin to stir, feet padding, shutters creaking, soft coughs. Tea served as both a literal and figurative alarm. It was the signal that morning had officially arrived. Mothers brewed it for daughters, wives for husbands, servants for masters. But preparing tea required patience and care. You didn't just pour hot water and call it a day. The leaves had to steep just right. Timing was crucial. Too short, and the brew was weak, barely a whisper. Too long, and it was bitter. No one wants to start the day with a mouthful of regret. You pour the amber liquid into a chipped cup, feeling its warmth seep through porcelain and into your hands. You carry it carefully to the table, where your family waits, some still half asleep. And then comes the ritual of awakening through taste. The first sip jolts the senses. The tannins bite lightly at the tongue. The warmth spreads like a gentle fire. The caffeine nudges the brain awake. The house breathes. Eyes open wider. Conversations begin. Tea was the most democratic alarm clock of the era, accessible across classes, beloved from bustling cities to quiet farms. You might think tea was simply an energy booster, but its role was much deeper. It was social glue. It marked the transition from night to day, sleep to work, rest to routine. Some households followed particular customs. In some, tea was served immediately upon waking. In others, it was saved for second breakfast, a calming pause after the initial flurry of chores. And there were regional differences too. In Victorian England, tea was often sweetened heavily with sugar, a luxury item that made the morning feel indulgent. Meanwhile, in Scotland, strong black tea was preferred, sometimes with a splash of whiskey for the brave or bedridden. But the role of tea as a wake-up tool came with quirks and oddities. For instance, some believed that the mere scent of brewing tea could rouse a sleeper. So in some homes, women placed teapots near bedroom doors or windows to let the aroma drift through corridors and hallways, gently coaxing those who were reluctant to rise. In others, the ritual was more direct. There are stories of determined wives who would drip a few tea leaves or hot water onto their husbands' faces to assure wakefulness, a mild shock therapy, Victorian style. Historians still debate how widespread these practices were, and whether they reflect real routines or simply stories told to illustrate female resourcefulness. But what is clear is that tea's role went beyond caffeine. It was a daily event, a small ceremony that connected people to each other and to the rhythms of the day. You can almost smell the steam rising now. Feel the fragile warmth of the cup between your fingers. Hear the faint clinking of spoons against porcelain. And as you take your own breath, preparing to rest, you realize that waking up in the 19th century wasn't just about leaving sleep behind, that it was about savoring the start of the day, one small, steaming cup at a time. As dawn stretches across the land, you find yourself thinking about something altogether quieter and more personal. The sense of smell. Because for many women in the 19th century, scent wasn't just about perfume or cleanliness. It was a crucial way to wake up. Imagine waking in a small, drafty room where sounds are muffled by thick walls and light struggles through smoky glass. You lie in bed, eyes closed, ears tuned to the neighborhood's soft creaks and whispers, but it's the smell that nudges you awake. The scent of fresh bread baking downstairs, the tongue of burning peat in the hearth, the faint, spicy aroma of herbs drying by the window. In a time before artificial alarms and noisy gadgets, aromas became nature's gentle alarm clock. Many women relied on these smells to signal the start of the day. The household cook would prepare the bread dough and place it near the fire to rise overnight, and by morning, that warm, yeasty smell would drift up the stairs, seeping under doors and curling around bed sheets. You'd breathe it in, and it would stir something deep inside, a primal reminder that the day's work was beginning. Some rural households hung bundles of aromatic herbs, rosemary, lavender, or mint in sleeping rooms, believing these scents could promote alertness and help rouse sleepers naturally. You might even keep a small bowl of water mixed with essential oils on your bedside table, a subtle fragrance that mingled with the early morning air. There are records of women lighting scent lamps, small oil lamps infused with fragrant oils that filled rooms with gentle aromas just before waking time. The idea was that this sensory cue would prepare the mind and body to rise, much like the modern practice of aromatherapy. Historians still discuss whether these methods were widespread traditions or limited to certain regions and social classes. Some suggest that scent-based waking was more common among rural women who worked closely with nature and relied heavily on their surroundings. In urban areas, where air was thick with smoke and soot, the story was different. Here, the smell of coal fires and city grime sometimes masked the more pleasant aromas. Yet even in these harsher environments, women found ways to harness scent. Scented handkerchiefs and sachets were carried or placed near beds to offer a small personal awakening cue. There was also a playful side to scent waking. Some women would test their household by placing pungent herbs or spices in unexpected places under pillows or near sleeping faces to provoke laughter and light-hearted scolding in the morning. You can almost imagine the gentle teasing. A sister waking another, with a sprig of rosemary tickling her nose, followed by sleepy giggles and half-hearted protests. And so, scent became not only a practical wake-up method, but also a way to bond, to bring lightness into the early hours dot as you lie in bed now. Maybe you notice a faint aroma in the air, a distant whiff of something warm, something comforting. Perhaps it's the scent of morning itself, reaching across centuries to touch your senses, a quiet invitation to wake. You wake again, eyes barely open, and you hear the soft shuffle of slippers across floorboards. The scent of warm bread still lingers faintly, but now something else fills the air. The delicate clink and scrape of metal dot in many 19th century homes, especially those with servants, or where several family members shared chores. The morning routine involved a cast of early risers with very specific tasks. And you, lucky or unlucky as you might feel, had a special role. You were the keeper of the chamber, pot dot yes, the humble chamber pot, that essential and often discreet vessel that saved many from cold, dark dashes to the outhouse. Waking up in the 19th century wasn't just about alarm clocks or roosters. It was also about managing the necessities dot your job. In those quiet pre-dawn hours was to collect the contents of the night and dispose of them properly. This task required a delicate balance. Enough care to avoid spillage, enough speed to keep up with the household's waking rhythm, and a measure of discretion to prevent embarrassing noises or odors from disturbing the others. The chamber pot wasn't glamorous, but it was essential dot in some houses. The pots were beautifully decorated, enameled, or painted with delicate floral patterns. In others, they were simple and utilitarian. Still, all carried a silent, shared history of the daily dance between comfort and necessity dot. As you lift the heavy pot, you recall stories from a cousin in Lancashire who remembered her father grumbling at the foolishness of chamber pots. Left overnight, insisting the family adopt a system of emptying them immediately upon waking, lest the stale air linger. The routine was well established. Upon waking, the first to rise would quietly gather the pots from each room, often wrapping them carefully in cloth or newspapers for transport. Then came the trek outside, usually to a cesspit or garden corner far from the main house. You walk through the chilly morning mist, clutching the pot tightly, mindful of every step. The dew soaks your slippers. The cold seeps through the thin soles. But the air is fresh, crisp, and new. Historians still debate the hygienic impact of chamber pot practices. Some argue that the reliance on them indoors helped reduce disease, spread by avoiding long nighttime trips outside. Others point to the risks of spills and odors as contributing factors to poor sanitary conditions. Regardless, for you and countless women like you, managing the chamber pot was part of the daily. Rhythm a practical, if unromantic, ritual marking the transition from night to day dot, and there's a certain comfort in that, isn't there? Knowing that even in these small, private acts, there was a shared understanding of care, duty, and the messy realities of life before indoor plumbing. Tonight, as you settle back into bed after your chore, the house is quieter. The morning light softens behind the curtains, and you feel a small sense of accomplishment. The day has begun. You wake again, this time greeted by a faint but distinct melody, a whistle, low and steady, weaving through the cool morning air. It's neither a bird nor a human voice, but something more mechanical, more deliberate. Welcome to the world of the knocker-up, a peculiar and largely forgotten profession from 19th century Britain and Ireland. Before alarm clocks were common or affordable, you relied on this uniquely human alarm service. To rouse you from slumber dot, imagine living in a bustling industrial town. The streets are dim and foggy, and gas lamps flicker along cobblestones. You lie in bed, listening for the faint tap-tap on your window or door, the knocker-up's signature call. Their job is to come, often armed with a long stick, a pea shooter, or a bat, and tap insistently until you are awake enough to get out of bed. For women, particularly working-class women who had early shifts at factories, this service was a lifeline. Your knocker-up might be a neighbor, a retired soldier, or even a fellow factory worker, moonlighting as a human alarm clock. Sometimes they were paid a few pennies per week. Other times, it was an informal arrangement between families. You can almost hear the knocker-up's rhythm now, the patient, repetitive tapping that cuts through the fog and dreams. It's persistent, but not cruel. A steady nudge from outside your walls. Some knocker-ups develop their own styles. One woman in Manchester reportedly used a pea shooter to tap on upstairs windows, a method both effective and entertaining, if a bit startling. Another man in Leeds was known for playing a tin whistle to gently rouse his clients before switching to louder knocking. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups were more reliable or more disruptive than mechanical alarm. Clocks, which began to appear in the late 19th century, but remained expensive for many. There were risks too. Knocker-ups had to brave all weather, rain, snow, freezing fog, and sometimes deal with grumpy or sleepy clients who wanted just 5 more minutes. But they took pride in their work, seeing themselves as vital cogs in the city's waking machinery. The service declined as affordable alarm clocks became widely available. But for decades, the knocker-up was a trusted morning companion. Tonight, as you imagine that gentle knocking echoing through your room, you realize how human your alarm truly was. A person committed to waking you, tapping against the window pane, ensuring your day would begin on time. And in that persistent tapping, there's a kindness and odd, comforting intimacy. You wake again, this time to the gentle, rhythmic sound of running water, a sound both soothing and insistent, flowing steadily from a copper basin or a simple pitcher placed just beside your bed. In many 19th century homes, especially among the middle and upper classes, water played a surprisingly significant role in morning routines, not only for washing, but also as a kind of subtle, natural alarm. Imagine waking up in a softly lit bedroom, where the servant has thoughtfully prepared a basin of cool water on a stand by your bedside. The slight clatter of the pitcher and bowl signals that morning has come, and it's time to rise. You might splash your face, feel the crisp freshness hit your skin, and let the sensation coax your senses fully awake. But water was more than a wake-up tool. It was also a symbol of cleanliness, health, and renewal, a vital part of Victorian beliefs about starting the day right. Women, especially, embraced water's refreshing power. Some kept damp cloths nearby to pat their cheeks or wrists, believing that the cool moisture would enliven both body and mind. Others relied on water's sound, deliberately leaving the basin uncovered so that the drip or splash would softly mark time in the quiet house. Historians still debate how common this practice was, given the variability of water supply and indoor plumbing across regions and classes. For many, fetching water from wells or pumps before dawn made such rituals impossible. Yet, in urban centers, with running water, the ritual was embraced by many households. You also find hints of water being used more playfully. Some women dribbled cold water on sleeping family members to wake them gently, a practical but cheeky method to avoid shouting. There are anecdotes about servants who, upon waking their mistresses, would splash a small amount of water near the bedpost as a wake-up signal. The sound of dripping water, especially in a silent early morning, carried a kind of rhythm that could be both calming and motivating. As you lie in bed, you can almost hear the gentle patter of water droplets, a quiet reminder that the day is beginning. That life flows forward, steady and inevitable. And perhaps there's something comforting in that, isn't there? The knowledge that even in centuries past, women found ways to wake gently, naturally, embracing simple elements to ease the transition from night to day. so you close your eyes. And imagine the water's cool touch, the faint splash, the sound of a pitcher set carefully back down. And slowly, very slowly, you begin to wake. You wake, perhaps reluctantly, to the gentle whisper of a clock's tick, a sound both mechanical and comforting. But this isn't a grand clock tower's booming bell. It's a small personal companion, the pocket watch dot by the late 19th century. Pocket watches had become more common, not just as status symbols for men, but also as practical tools for women, particularly in the middle and upper classes. You, perhaps a governess or a shopkeeper, carry yours discreetly on a chain tucked into your bodice. Its tiny hands are your silent companions through the day, and especially your mornings. Some women trained themselves to awaken just as their watch's minute hand approached a certain point, using the ticking and the faint weight of the watch in their hands as a cue. Others relied on the watch's alarm function, an intricate, delicate mechanism that ticked steadily until it rang softly, waking the sleeper without disturbing the whole household. The watch's alarm was a marvel of vim. 19th century ingenuity. Miniature hammers struck tiny bells inside the casing, producing a high-pitched chime. It was personal, private, and far more reliable than roosters or servants. However, these watches were expensive, delicate, and required regular winding. Women often entrusted them to their husbands or fathers for maintenance, and some viewed them as fussy contraptions. Historians still debate how widely used pocket watch alarms were among women. While certainly popular among the affluent, their use among working-class women was likely limited by cost, but the cultural impact was significant. Owning a pocket watch symbolized control over time, a growing modern ideal. Women began to value punctuality and self-discipline, using these watches to align themselves with the expanding industrial world schedules. There are charming anecdotes of women who, upon hearing their watch's alarm, would slip out of bed, quietly to avoid waking others, cherishing those few moments of peaceful solitude before the day's bustle. You can almost feel the cool metal of the watch in your home, the soft ticking filling the room, and the faint chime that beckons you to rise dot in that moment. Time itself becomes a gentle, personal herald waking you with precision and care dot. So as you lie awake, consider how this tiny device represented a shift not only in how women woke up, but in how they related to the very concept of time. A small, ringing revolution nestled in your pocket. You wake, stirred by the faint, rhythmic pounding of a footstep on the stair steady, purposeful, almost like a heartbeat echoing through the house. Tonight, you find yourself in a bustling boarding school dormitory, or perhaps a convent, where waking is not a private affair, but a communal ritual. Here, there is no reliance on sunbeams or kettles or clocks, but rather the trusted, human presence of the matron or mistress of discipline, the figure responsible for ensuring every young woman wakes on time. She moves through the dormitory with practiced efficiency, her footsteps soft but insistent. With a gentle knock, a whispered name, or sometimes a firm tap on the shoulder, she rouses one girl after another. The routine is methodical and necessary. When dozens of girls share a room, individual alarms are impractical. Instead, waking is choreographed like a dance, flowing from one bed to the next, moving with the rhythm of shared responsibility and authority. You recall stories from school. Diaries accounts of how the matron carried a small wooden stick or ruler, which she would tap lightly against bed springs or wooden furniture, creating a subtle noise that reverberated through the room without startling sleepers. Awake too harshly dot. The goal was to awaken gently, but firmly, balancing kindness with discipline. Too light a touch, and girls might slip back into sleep. Too harsh, and the morning could begin with grumbles and unrest. The role of the matron was pivotal in shaping the discipline and time consciousness expected of young women in such institutions. She was not only a waker, but a guardian of order, ensuring that waking time signaled the start of responsibility and routine. Historians still debate how effective these methods were in fostering punctuality or simply reinforcing institutional control. Some argue that the ritual built a sense of communal belonging. Others see it as an early form of enforced regimentation. There are anecdotes of creative waking methods: singing softly outside doors, tapping on windows with a spoon, or even reciting poetry as a gentle way to stir sleepy minds. As you lie there, you can almost hear the faint knocks and taps, the soft murmur of a voice calling your name, and the slow unfolding of consciousness in the quiet dormitory. Waking in such a community was both a shared challenge and a moment of connection, a reminder that even in sleep, you were part of something larger. And as you drift back toward dreams, you carry with you the echo of footsteps and the promise of a new day. You wake again, this time greeted not by human voices or household noises, but by the sounds of animals, a softer, more organic form of warning signal that 19th century women often relied on, especially in rural and farming communities. Imagine waking to the low rumble of a cow's moo, the bleating of goats, or the clucking of chickens stirring in their coops. These sounds mark the start of the day long before clocks tick or kettles whistle. In many households, animals were the original alarm clocks, their instincts finely tuned to the natural rhythms of sunrise and feeding times. You lie in bed, hearing the familiar chorus outside your window, and slowly your senses sharpen. The rooster's crow, though often exaggerated in stories, was just one part of a broader symphony: pigs grunting as they eagerly awaited breakfast scraps, horses shifting in their stalls, dogs lifting their heads to the dawn. This animal chorus was more than background noise. It was an essential part of the waking process. It connected people to the land, the seasons, and the unchanging cycles of life. You might have risen with the animals, stepping outside to help with morning chores, the scent of hay and fresh earth mixing with the crisp morning air. There are records of women training specific animals to become reliable wake-up signals. For example, some families encouraged geese to honk early or kept dogs near windows to bark at the first signs of day. Historians still debate how intentional these animal alarms were versus natural coincidences that people learned to interpret. But the bond between humans and animals was undeniable. Women working the fields, tending gardens, or managing farmyards often found these sounds more trustworthy than human-made alarms or unreliable clocks. There's even a charming story of a farmer's wife who trained her cat to jump on her bed precisely at dawn, though cats being cats. The plan only succeeded half the time. Tonight, as you imagine the sounds of animals waking the world, you feel a deep connection to that natural rhythm, one that stretches back through centuries and civilizations. It's a reminder that before machines or servants, before alarms or watches, nature itself was the most reliable call to rise. And as you let your mind drift to sleep, you carry with you the gentle murmurs of animals, singing the first notes of morning. You wake slowly, not to a sharp sound or a sudden jolt, but to the quiet ritual of morning prayers and chants, a deeply personal and communal way. Women in many 19th century cultures began their days in homes where faith was woven tightly into daily life. Waking was often marked by the soft murmur of prayers, the flicker of candlelight, and the rhythmic cadence of familiar hymns. You lie in bed, hearing the whispered voices of family members beginning their devotions in nearby rooms, or perhaps the gentle tolling of a small bell signaling the start of morning worship. These sounds create a sacred space for waking, a moment to gather one's thoughts, to prepare mentally and spiritually for the day ahead. In many households, especially among Catholics, Anglicans, and other Christian denominations, the morning prayer was a ritual passed down through generations, often led by the mother or grandmother. Some women rose just early enough to kneel beside their beds, reciting rosaries or silent prayers, drawing strength and calm before the demands of daily life. Historians still discuss how these spiritual routines influenced women's sense of time and self-discipline, linking waking not just to practical necessity, but to a rhythm of reflection and grace. In other cultures, similar rituals existed: chanting, meditation, or offerings marking the dawn. You might recall accounts from 19th century India, where women would rise before sunrise to perform pujas, ringing bells, and lighting lamps to honor deities, marking the transition from darkness to light. The act of waking became a ceremony, grounding women in their faith and community. You imagine the soft glow of candles, the scent of incense mingling with morning air, the voices rising in gentle chorus. And as you lie there, you feel the day's first light, not only in the room, but in your spirit. It's a quiet awakening, one that embraces the mind, body, and soul. And as the morning unfolds beyond your window, you carry that calm with you into the day. Now, as we draw to a close, imagine yourself sinking deeper into rest. The world grows soft and still around you. The cares of waking fade gently into the background. The last tendrils of morning light slip away, leaving you wrapped in warmth and calm. Rest easy, knowing that no matter how the world may wake, you have your own quiet, gentle rhythm. As your eyelids grow heavy and the steady rhythm of your breath slows, picture the soft glow of a fading candle, its flame flickering low. The day's noises dissolve into whispers, and the air becomes cool and still. There's a gentle hush settling over everything, like a blanket pulled snug around your shoulders. Breathe in slowly, feeling calm wash over you with each inhale, and with each exhale, releasing tension you didn't realize you held. Let your mind drift to quiet, soothing thoughts, the warm sun filtering softly through linen curtains, gentle tapping of a distant knocker-up, the comforting scent of morning tea. There is no rush here, no urgent calls, just the peaceful passage of time. You are safe. You are calm. You are ready for sleep. Let yourself sink into this quiet darkness, welcoming rest and renewal. And when you wake, may it be with gentle light and soft sounds, carrying the peace of these stories into your day. Sweet dreams.